thing is that I want the drums. I want the little drums. I want the drum controller. Last of Us 2 is really, really good. People who didn't like it, it's one of three things. They either didn't play it, wanted to hate it, or didn't understand it. That's just the fact of the fucking matter. The game's really fucking good. It does a lot of things right. Its story is good. The gameplay is an updated version of Last of Us 1's. So if you're going to praise Last of Us 1's gameplay and then shit on Last of Us 2's gameplay, like, you're just a hypocrite, right? Like, they're practically the same game. And it's not like it doesn't make improvements. It does make improvements to the gameplay. So the game's good. The story's good. People just didn't like it because they didn't want to like it because of the leaks. But a lot of information that was in the leaks was just wrong. Like, there were a lot of things in the leaks that were, just like, wrong. Like, objectively wrong, right? Like, they said Abby's trans. Not true. They said Neil Druckmann did the mocap for a character who spit on Joel's body. Not true. There's some other stuff in the leaks that are just not true, right? And so people didn't want to like the game, or they didn't. I mean, the fact that like here's the biggest thing you can say about Last of Us 2, right? The fact that like the narrative around the game was that it was bad before it even came out, and people could have played the game, should tell you all you need to know about listening to people who didn't like the game, right? Most people didn't play the game. Are like, oh yeah, I played it, and you're like, really? And like, and they don't have anything of note to say about why they didn't like it. And it's this growing trend in the gaming community of progressively more and more disliking these big AAA Western games for whatever reason, right? Oh, crunch is bad. Even though crunch has been a consistent part of the industry, it's in Japanese games as well. The only reason we don't talk about Japanese games is because the Japanese work culture causes crunch time all the time, right? Or they're like, oh, fucking, whatever, And not to mention with crunch, there was a fucking game dev. I retweeted a thread a while ago of this game dev who made this he's like a AAA game dev, and he made this entire long thing where he's like, look, crunch sucks, everyone knows that, but here are reasons why, because of the games industry making video games, like, you kind of can't escape it. It's just going to be a part of it, right? People are like, well, Hades didn't have crunch. Hades was also an indie game that went through early access that is a team of like 10 people. It's not a major AAA game. Like, it's not the same thing at all. So it's like one of these things where like people just don't know what they're talking about, right? Like, first of all, people do not know what they're talking about because they don't look into what they're talking about, right? People just like to make shit up, and they like to go off what they see on Twitter off these headlines. They don't actually look, they don't actually research, they don't know what they're talking about. That's the first thing. The second thing, right, is that there's been this growing sentiment that Western games bad, Japanese games good, right? But not only that, like, Western AAA bad, right? Like, Call of Duty bad, anything Ubisoft does bad, right? And it's progressing what used to be at the start of the generation, and, like, the first half of the generation, like, oh, Sony gets it right? Like, all these Sony exclusives, right? And it kind of started with God of War. But with God of War, a lot of people still liked the game. But, like, there's this growing rift, right? Where, like, the games journalists will play a game, right? That's good, right? Like Last of Us. Or, like, I'll get to the Cyberpunk discussion in a second, because that's a completely different bag of worms. So, they'll play a game like Last of Us 2. And the game journalists who just play the game and look at it, aren't, they're not engaging in the online discussion around the game, because how can they, right? They're playing it before the game's out. So they play the game, and they're like, yeah, this game's pretty good, Maybe some of them are like, I wasn't as into the story. Maybe it's like a 9. Maybe it's an 8. Some of them are like, yeah, I really liked it. It's a really good game. It's a 10, right? No, none of them gave it a 3 because the game isn't a 3, right? And then you get this storm swept up, right? With the leaks, and then all these people on Twitter making shit up and lying and saying all this shit, right? All this crazy stuff. It gets whipped up into this frenzy on Twitter. So then people play it, and they're like, oh my god, the game's bad. It's a 3, it's a 2, and the user score gets tanked. And it's like, okay, when you have one group that played the game, right, whose job it is to play and critique games, right, and they played the game before it's out, okay, and they're like, yeah, it has some problems, but ultimately, like, it's a good game. And then you have this other group that is swept up in this mob mentality of, oh, this game's bad, all these things that are starting before the game's even out from leaks that are not true. It's like, oh my god. Like, how are you real? Like, critical thinking is lost. And so it's like, there's just this growing sentiment of, like, these big AAA games bad, right? And so, like, was I okay with Last of Us 2 winning Game of the Year at the Game Awards? Yeah, it was a great fucking game. As someone who played the game, it was really solid. And I mean, I streamed the first part of it, and there, in what we streamed, there was nothing bad. It was pretty entertaining. And then, you look at like, then you get to Cyberpunk, The discourse around movie games is bad. Merry Christmas, Blue Knight. Games journalists aren't as bad as people think. People overrate how bad games journalists are. I think the biggest problem with games journalists... Here's the biggest thing is that there are some games that should not be reviewed by games journalists, right? So when you talk about a game like Animal Crossing or these games that are big time sinks, right? Games journalists should not be reviewing them because, if a games journalist... Well, we'll get to that too. Again, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of factors. People don't take outside factors into account. They try to look at things in a vacuum and they lose like all critical thinking. But like, of course the games journalist isn't going to like a game like Animal Crossing. They play it for 2 weeks. They have to like time travel and try to do these things and then put out a review, right? That's not how the game's meant to be played. That's not how you're enjoying the game. Of course, they're not going to give it like a 10, whereas like, someone who plays the game correctly is going to enjoy it more. And you can say, oh, well, there's no correct way to play games. That kind of fucking is. Games are designed to be played a certain way, right? If I play Doom and I turn my monitor off, of course I'm not going to fucking enjoy Doom. And yeah, you could say, oh, well, you're playing the game how you want to play it. It's not designed to be played with fucking my monitor off, right? So, like, there is a certain amount of, like, things are meant to be done a certain way, right? And if you listen to fucking game devs talk about how they make games and how they design levels and such, they kind of design it for you to go through it a certain way. Or some games are designed to be more open, but there's still supposed to be some kind of, like, you are playing the game. And yes, there are some game journalists that should not be games journalists. I'm not saying all games journalists are perfect, but I'm saying that, like, honestly, like, a lot of these guys reviewing the games make it clear they know what they're talking about more than random people on Twitter. Let's just be fucking honest, all right? And you can say, oh, well, they used to hate Japanese games, right? Yeah, okay. I think here's an important distinction to make about Japanese games that people don't talk about. I talk with What and Crafts, we talk about this all the time, where, like, the more you get into like anime and like Japanese media, right, the more you understand the culture and the more it bleeds into other things, right? So like then, it even turns into like you're playing Nintendo games and you're recognizing like aspects of Japanese culture that are present in like Mario, right? Or Zelda, right? Things that you wouldn't notice as a kid or you wouldn't notice if you were just like a games fan who doesn't really engage with like Japanese culture in enough of a way to understand the way the culture works, right? So when you have games that are extremely Japanese, both in design and philosophy, and the culture seeps through into the game, if people don't know that culture and they don't have that cultural context, they're not going to be able to appreciate the game. And so the problem with that isn't that individual games journalist, because he should just not be reviewing that game. At that point, what you should do is put, like if I was IGN, right? If I was like the head editor of IGN, I would hire a bunch of people to write my reviews who have very different favorite games and favorite gaming and like gaming backgrounds, right? Like maybe I'd hire a guy who's like really into shooters, right? He plays a lot of FPSs, a lot of third-person shooters, maybe some like open world like games, right? Like maybe he plays like Assassin's Creed or something, and I would only have him review those, right? He reviews every COD. And the only problem is burnout, right? You don't want someone to get burned out on a certain type of game genre, which can legitimately happen and is also scary and is also something to think about with games reviewers. If you look at what one reviewer is doing and he's reviewed 10 types of the exact same game in a row, or like, when your reviewers review the same Mario Party every year or the same Call of Duty every year, of course they're going to fucking wane on it as time goes on. They're playing the same game for multiple hours every year, right? But, you have to have people who specialize in certain things, right? So I have a guy who plays JRPGs, loves JRPGs, could play them for hours. He's the guy I have playing and reviewing these JRPGs, right? I don't have some guy who like, oh yeah, I play FIFA and Madden and, I dabble in like, Ubisoft games. Okay, go review fucking, Cold Steel 4. Like, what's the point of that? He's not going to like the game. That's not his game. And I think they do that. But I think that was something that wasn't as big of a deal back in the day that I think, you can see more and more starting to be a thing. So that's an important part of it, right? It's not like one games journalist should not be able to review everything, right? If you handed me a 4X game and you were like, hey, Vindy, go fucking review Crusader Kings 3. I've never played a Crusader Kings in my life. I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know what makes a good Crusader Kings, right? It would be a terrible review. Everyone who likes the series would fucking lambast me. So, like, of course I wouldn't review the game. But sometimes these people doing the reviews, that's the situation they're put in. And people don't talk about that situation. Like, how are they supposed to make a good review when they don't know anything about their reviewing? Okay, Blue Knight, if you're bringing up game reviews from 2013, there is no reason for you to be doing that. That was 7 years ago. That has no context in the current discussion or the current landscape of games journalism. Let's just clear that out of the way right now. Like, that was 2013. right? Like I said, like the industry has changed. That was 2 console generations ago. It's one of these things where like there's a lot that goes into it that people don't look at, right? And to get back to my discussion, there's this growing negative sentiment around these AAA. It was with Red Dead 2 as well, right? There was like this negative sentiment towards Red Dead 2 from people who never played the game. And you could say, oh, that's not true. It definitely fucking is. And like you can see it if you look at like the amount of people that were like shit talking Red Dead 2 and Last of Us and Cyberpunk that did not play the game, did not buy it, and they're just going off what other people say and can say, oh, well, Cyberpunk's really glitchy. Okay, as someone who has 50 hours in the game. Let's talk about the glitches in Cyberpunk, right? I have seen no game-breaking glitches. I've had no UI glitches. I've never had to restart the game. My game's never crashed. Now, I am playing on PC, on like a mid-tier PC build. So what does that tell you? Okay, on PC, and if you listen to every single games journalist that reviewed the game on PC, they all said, yeah, all the bugs are only like these minor visual things, or like these minor weird bugs that happen. They're not game breaking. I didn't encounter any game breaking glitches. The game ran fine for the most part. It was just buggy. You know, there were a lot of visual bugs on PC. Yes, the consoles should not have had the game. The game should not have released on PS4 and Xbox when it did. That's very true. Anyone who says that is correct. I agree with that. It should not have released. It shouldn't have released on PC yet. But the PC version isn't that bad. So people are like, oh, well, the games journalists gave it a good score because they played the competent version of the game, right? And almost every review I said gave it like a 9, and we're like, look, the game would be a 10, but it's buggy. Are there more console gamers than PC gamers? I don't see why that matters, right? Like when they made the review, they specified they were playing it on PC and specified it was the PC review. So why does it matter which there's more of? It shouldn't have been a PC exclusive. It could have come to consoles. I think that gap is narrowed quite a bit in the last console generation. I think at the beginning of, or throughout like the 7th generation of consoles, the 360 and the PS3, there were almost every gamer was console, and there were PC, but they were way fewer and farther between. I think throughout this last console generation, there's been much more of a shift to PC, and I think the market share of PC gamers has gone way the fuck up. So it's one of those things where, like, you know, there's a lot that goes into it that people don't talk about. And there's this negative growing sentiment towards AAA games and towards Western AAA games from people who don't play them. So as someone who does play a lot of Western AAA games, right, especially in, like, the anime and manga and, like, you know, more Japanese-influenced sphere, you cannot deny that there is a negative sentiment towards Western AAA games, or even towards just Western media in general. It definitely exists. It's definitely fucking there. And if you try to deny that, you're wrong. Like, you're wrong. It exists. It's very fucking prevalent, right? And as someone who enjoys Western games and buys a lot of them and plays them, you know, I can look at them and be like, yeah, you know, there are flaws in them. There's flaws in fucking Japanese-made shit, too. Like, you're holding one above the other because, whatever, you might like the fucking Japanese JRPGs more. That doesn't mean that fucking, you know, Far Cry or Assassin's Creed is bad, right? Like, they're competently made games, right? Like, fucking, you know, if you look at, I don't know. I don't know. Like, there are Japanese games that, like, are the equivalents, right? Like, it's not this fucking basic thing. They just focus on different things inside the industry, and they focus on different things inside of gaming. But the games aren't bad, right? Like, I could buy Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I'd probably have problems with it, but, you know, I'd probably come out of it saying, yeah, it was a competently made game. There were good things there. You know, playing Cyberpunk, pretty fucking good game. Got some fucking great stories, some great fucking side missions. Gameplay is really fun. Yeah, it's a little buggy. They've already patched it 3 times, and the last time I played, I don't think I encountered a single bug, and I played for like 6 hours. So I hate this growing sentiment, and the more I see of it, the more I want to like sit here and fight against it by like talking about these Western games and being like, look, these games aren't bad. Y'all just don't know what you're talking about, right? And here's the thing, right? And here's the biggest thing I will say. It's the same people that misunderstand Shonen and misunderstand One Piece and Naruto and Bleach that sit here and tell you Last of Us 2 is a bad story. It's the same people. Am I really going to trust someone who can't understand a children's manga? about understanding each other and not being hateful when they say that fucking The Last of Us 2 wasn't good? No. Why would I understand? Why would I trust them? Right? Like these. The problem is, all right. I'm gonna be completely honest. I'm gonna get a little big-headed here. All right. I'm big-headed as in a little bit of an ego. Right? I'm gonna stroke my cock. Right. There's too many people on Twitter who think they know what they're talking about and then say shit and then try to hide behind, oh, well, it's just my opinion, man. Right? They hide behind like their shield of subjectivity while saying things that are like demonstrably wrong. So it's one of those things where it's like, dude, like you're just like talking out of your ass. You're not making sense. It's like you're just demonstrably wrong. Nothing you're saying matters. Like, shut up. Right? Like that's like a thing, you know? And so basically the point of my entire rant is, if you know that Vindy's been playing a game and you want to know if it's good, just come to me, because I'm not a little shit. You know? And like people asked me when I was playing Cyberpunk, right? And I stream with crowds. They're like, should I buy Cyberpunk? And I told them no. Yeah, I like the game. It'd probably be one of my favorite games this year if I finished it in time. But, you know, like I really like the game. I'm not telling people to buy it. I would definitely not tell someone to buy that game. I would say wait 6 months. You know, wait 6 months, wait a year. If you have a PlayStation 4 or you have an Xbox One, especially if you have a baseline one. I think if you have a Pro or a Series X, maybe you can get away with it. I would also say wait till you get a PS5, right? A lot of things, you know, it's a whole thing, right? There's a lot that goes into it, but a lot of people like to pretend that, I don't know. That's not the main thing people criticize Last of Us 2 for, but sure, we can pretend it is. I don't think that's valid because, you know, and maybe you could say this is anecdotal or whatever, but I played the game on like one of the hardest difficulties and I didn't have the ammo to kill people. So I didn't kill that many people. Here's the big thing I will say. It's massively overblown how bad the game makes you feel for just like killing people randomly, indiscriminately. People like to bring up ludonarrative dissonance with that game a lot, and it wasn't something I personally ever felt because I don't think the game is ever that I don't think the game, like a lot of the things that the game is, you know, you could say is making you feel bad about. Well, no, that's I mean, again, that's one of the criticisms that like people who want to hate the game are saying, but like, okay, let's be honest, right? Like, first of all, ludonarrative dissonance in that game isn't that bad. Also, most combat encounters, you don't have to fight anyone if you can get past. That's also something to think about that people don't talk about. The other thing is, it's like a lot of things that like happen in the story that you're supposed to feel bad about aren't things that you actively do, right? And it's not even, look, the game's fucking story here. Let's be honest about Last of Us 2 for a second. Anyone who played it and has a brain knows the main theme of that fucking game isn't that like revenge bad or that like or that it's not about revenge being bad or about like, oh, violence is bad. It's this much it's ultimately like there's like this scene that I don't want to spoil for people who are going to play the game because I know no one's going to play the game. There's this scene that's a flashback scene that takes place right before the end of the game. That is the entire point of the game, essentially. It's, honestly, being honest, one of the best scenes I've ever seen in a game. Like, legitimately, fucking amazing scene. And, you know, the game isn't about, like, revenge bad or violence bad. It's much more about, like, love and about doing what you can and what you need to for the ones you love. So, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, he says that, and, like, it's partially about that. Because, like, the cycle of violence plays a role in the theme of love, right? Because it's hard to explain, and I can't explain it without going into spoilers. And I can't explain, and I don't want to go into spoilers right now. But essentially, it's not, like, the point of the game isn't this, like, simple, oh, revenge bad, violence bad, that people say, right? It's much more complicated than that. And a lot of it, like, look, all I'm going to say is the game kind of takes the stance that, like, it's not all bad, and that, like, yeah, even if you do bad things, like, you can have a reason for it, and, like, it can be okay. Kind of. I can't go too into it because of spoilers. But people misunderstood the game, and they misunderstood, like, every fucking aspect of it. And it's not surprising, right? Like, again, if you listen to people who don't understand, like, again, people will, like, listen to people, right, talk about, like, okay, let's even just talk about, like, Pat and Wooly, right? Clearly didn't fucking get Naruto, right? Demonstrably didn't understand it, right? Then they'll go and say something about a video game. People are like, yeah, you know, they didn't know what they were talking about with Naruto, but they understood this game's story. It's like, no, that's not how it works. If they clearly don't know how to, like, understand a story, that doesn't just stop at Naruto, right? So, like, these people who don't know what they're talking about with certain things, people listen to them, and it's like, oh, my God. So maybe they didn't understand this story, but, you know, they're really right when they talk about the story-driven game and why the story's bad. Like, that's not how it fucking works. That's not. Like, stories, like, don't work like that. Like, yes, you know, I will agree that, like, you know, maybe, you know, someone talks about why the shooting in fucking, like, say someone makes a video, like, the shooting mechanics in Halo 3 are bad. All right? And then they talk about, you know, why, I don't know, fucking Dragon Quest 11 understands turn-based combat. Maybe they were completely wrong about Halo. But turn-based combat is so completely different that they could be correct, right? And that's why discussing games is way harder. But discussing stories is not that hard. And discussing stories in games is the same as discussing stories in other things, because it's a story. We're looking at the story beats, we're looking at what the story says. So people who can't understand a basic story aren't going to understand other stories. That's just kind of how it goes. So, I mean, I'm at the point now where just most people, when I see people say shit, I just don't believe them. You know, I'm a firm believer. I am the biggest believer of all time in the camp of make your opinions on your own. Do not have an opinion on something you haven't experienced. Right? So do not have an opinion on a game you haven't played. Played. That's a key word. People should not have opinions on games that they watched a Let's Play of. You did not play the game. And you would say, oh, but I saw the story. It's not the fucking same, and here's why. If you're playing a game, you are growing an attachment to that main character because you are controlling them throughout. So you're going to be more attached to that character than you would be if you just watched it. That's like a proven fact. So you can't just watch a Let's Play and be like, well, no, but I essentially played it. I watched a Let's Play. It's not the fucking same. Don't act like it is. Even for the story, it's not the fucking same. Video games, you have to play. People don't like when I say that because of whatever. You're being a fucking gatekeeper or whatever. No, I'm not. If you want to have an opinion on a video game, you can play it. If you didn't play it, you can have an opinion. It doesn't matter, right? If you want to have an opinion on a manga, you have to read the manga. If you want to have an opinion on an anime, you have to read the anime. If you want to have an opinion on a fucking Netflix show, you have to watch it, right? Like, it's not that fucking complicated. Yet, for some reason, that's like heresy to say because I want to complain about video games on Twitter. Yeah, Specialist, you're right. They're not the same at all. And people act like they are. And they're so wildly different that, it blows my mind that people actually think that that's comparable in any way. Can you have an opinion on something based on a review? You shouldn't. I mean, you can do whatever you want. But in my opinion, I guess, you know, maybe instead of saying you can't, I think people should understand that if you didn't play the thing in question yourself, your opinion does not matter. Right? You know, like if I'm talking to someone and, you know, I'm like, oh, how's, let me think of a game I haven't played yet that I own. So I'm like, oh, how's Horizon Zero Dawn, right? You know, I own that game. I played like an hour of it. And they're like, oh, yeah, I watched a review and it's really good. So the game's really good. You'll like it. Your opinion doesn't matter. I don't know why I would listen to you, right? So it's one of those things where, like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. A review is not the same as you playing it. And you should not let someone else's opinion decide your own. You should always decide your own opinion based on your experiences. No. Blue Knight, there's no world in which you can have an opinion on something you haven't yourself experienced. It's not like, this isn't like a nuanced take. Like, this is a hard and fast rule. If you have not experienced something, your opinion on it does not matter because your opinion on it is uninformed. Right? Like that's just the fucking truth. But that's like my biggest thing. It just I really hate people having opinions on Twitter that haven't like played what they're talking about. It's like shut up. Like it literally is like your opinion does not matter, and like people don't like hearing that, right? Because they want their opinions to matter. But like it's fucking the most true thing I could ever say, you know. So you know what can you do? Can't win them all.